So let's take a closer look at what's in the Monitor, Support, and Fulfill practices themselves. The syllabus for this course requires us to understand the processes and value streams of the Monitor, Support, and Fulfill practices, as well as how information and technology support and enable the practices. By the end of this topic, you'll be able to explain the purpose of the 5 MSF practices, as well as recalling the definitions of key terms related to these practices. Now, we're going to start with an overview of all of the practices and how they collaborate and work together to ensure that services are available and performing as and when required by our customers and users. And I'm going to use this timeline to do that. Essentially, we'll be talking about how incidents affect the organization and services, how we're able to restore those incidents. We'll be talking about service requests and how those service requests are fulfilled. And we're going to look at the impact of each of these on the services themselves. So the idea is that we want downtime to be as short as possible, and we want uptime to be as long as possible. So downtime is represented by the time between when an incident occurs and the time it is resolved. And then uptime is from the time an incident has been resolved to the time that the incident occurs again. So again, one of the purposes of all of these practices is to ensure that downtime is as short as possible and that uptime is as long as possible. In incident management, we focus on reducing the amount of downtime. So as an incident occurs, we want to make sure that we detect it as quickly as possible so that we're able to assign the resources to diagnose it and to resolve it as quickly as possible. Definition of an incident is an unplanned interruption to a service or a reduction in the quality of a service. And we'll be talking a lot more about what constitutes a reduction in quality and an interruption. But for the meantime, that is the definition that we're going to use. So an unplanned interruption has occurred, the service is unavailable, and users are unable to use it, therefore unable to perform the job that service supports. Our role to resolve that incident as quickly as possible and to restore the service as soon as possible. In problem management, we want to focus on making sure that uptime is as long as possible. So whereas incident is very reactive, as an incident occurs, we want to make sure we reduce the downtime by restoring service and resolving the incident. But in problem management, we want to focus on ways of maintaining uptime for as long as possible. In other words, preventing incidents from occurring in the first place. A problem is a cause or a potential cause of one or more incidents. And so the idea behind problem management is if you can identify a potential cause of an incident before the incident occurs, and you can remove that cause or remediate that cause, then you can extend the uptime of that service. Service request management is about making services available to users in the first place. So it does not constitute downtime. As soon as the user has submitted a request for the service, the team will work on fulfilling that request and the user will be able to continue working. It does not stop any other users from working. It does not impact the quality of the service for anybody else. It is simply a way of being able to provide that service to somebody who requests it for the first time. So a service request is defined as a request from a user or a user's authorized representative that initiates a service action which has been agreed as part of normal service delivery. So there's a lot in that definition, and we're going to come back to most of it a little bit later on, but let me just unpack that a little bit before we move on from this slide. So first of all, service requests are from users. They are not internal requests within IT. They're not technical requests from one team to another. They are specifically a request from a user. They're also a request for a service or a service action which has been agreed as a normal part of service delivery. Now, what constitutes normal will vary from organization to organization, and even from business unit to business unit, and sometimes even from user to user. We're going to talk about how we calculate what's normal a little bit later in the course. But in the meantime, what I want to focus on is the fact that a request is focused on a service action which has been agreed. So this is not just a generic query or a person calling because they need help on how to do something. This is a specific item which we have agreed with the user if they need us to perform this action or to deliver the service in terms of perhaps a service level agreement. This is something they can request, and this is something that we will perform. So it is predefined and it is initiated by a user or a user representative. Now, let's look a little bit at the difference between events and user queries and incidents. So in this slide, we see a scenario where there is an error. So we have a problem that has occurred within one or other component that is used to deliver the service. That error has caused incidents. Now, in this particular case, the events or the incidents have been detected by monitoring and event management. So there have been tools out in the network. They've picked up the fact that there is this problem and it is causing some sort of disruption to the normal operation of some or other component. So it has picked it up, reported it. It said, this is not normal. This is a disruption, and it has logged it as an event. Now, the other way to detect events, of course, is by the user detecting that event themselves. At this point, the incident has, in fact, disrupted the service to the user. So while it's here, perhaps it has disrupted a component, but the impact of that may not yet have been felt by the user. In this case over here, down at the bottom of the slide, the impact has already been felt by the user. They have detected the incident and they'll report it typically to a service desk. Now, there are many other ways of reporting incidents, but for the purpose of this discussion, let's just say they pick up the phone and they call the service desk. Now, the service desk is responsible for managing and coordinating incidents and other user queries. There are all kinds of user queries that may be received by the service desk. They range from service requests, incident reports, queries on how to perform a task. They're just a number of different queries that could come through the service desk. And the role of the service desk is to accept those queries, triage them, in other words, figure out what kind of query they are, and then make sure they are processed by the appropriate procedure or process. So, for example, if it is an incident, the service desk will make sure that an incident is registered and that incident is managed and tracked through the incident management process. If it is a service request is registered and it is fulfilled using the appropriate procedure. That's what we mean by triage. So the ability to classify and decide what type of query it is and how it needs to be managed. So we mentioned that monitoring and event management has a role to play in detecting events and potentially incidents. So let's have a look at the definition of an event. So an event is any change of state that has significance for the management of a service or a configuration item. Now, as you can imagine, or as you know, there are thousands of things that happen in an organization every single day. Every time a user logs into a system, that is potentially an event. Anytime a transaction is processed by a device that is potentially an event, something is happening. The question is, do we need to know about that happening in order to manage the service or a configuration item? If we do need to know about it, we classify it as an event. Now, it is still, in a sense, an event, even if we don't want to know about it. But we're really only concerned about tracking and monitoring the events that are relevant to how we manage a service or a configuration item. Event management monitoring and event management may detect situations which represent a disruption to service. So, for example, they can see that the performance of a particular component is unusual. It may be way slower than usual, in fact, to such an extent that if unchecked, it could result in a disruption to the service. Or it may even detect situations where services are already disrupted. And so monitoring and event management is very often the first place in which an incident is detected. This is important, and we'll get into this a bit later in the course, but it's important because the earlier you can detect an incident, the more quickly you can figure out how you're going to deal with it, how you're going to handle it, and how you're going to resolve it. So as you can see, all of the MSF practices are applied together in managing the overall availability of services. In some cases, it is to make sure that if there is a disruption, we can restore that service and make it available again as quickly as possible. In other cases, the practice is all about extending the amount of uptime of the service and making sure there is no disruption. And in yet other cases, it is the ability to provide the service upon request in the first place. So there you are, the two things, the two major components, downtime and uptime. In order to minimize downtime, resolve incidents, and restore normal operations, we can see that monitoring and event management, service desk, and incident management are all involved. Problem management is involved, but proactively, and we'll talk about that later on in the course. Ensuring normal operations and delivery and preventing incidents, this is to extend uptime, is achieved also through monitoring and event management, by service desk, by problem management, and by request fulfillment. You'll notice that incident management is not involved in that because it is reactive. It is there to detect incidents when they occur and resolve them so that service can be restored. You'll notice that request fulfillment is not about resolving incidents and restoring normal operations, because it is about providing services upon request.